watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
Hello, I'm Mark Golub, and what a pleasure I have to reintroduce you to one of the most creative, innovative, and lovely human beings on the world Jewish scene today. It's my pleasure to welcome back Scott Shay, who is the author of Getting Our Groove Back, How to Energize American Jewry. Scott is also chairman of the board of Signature Bank of New York, and he's one of the most active Jews in the New York metropolitan area. He's on the board of UJA Federation of New York, and is on the board of the Partnership for Excellence in Jewish Education. Scott is also a member of the Birthright Israel Steering Committee, and he was the chair of the Fund for Jewish Education. And as we discussed last time, Scott and his wife Susan are the founders of the Jewish Youth Connection, an innovative attempt to do Hebrew school education. Scott, thank you for joining me again.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So I want to talk now about the specific, what you call planks, your programmatic suggestions for what we should do to energize Jewish life. And I'm just going to, again, take some, we talked about Hebrew schools last time. I just want to touch on this for a moment, because the second plank deals with day schools, and you talked about how it was important for you and Susan that your 4 children would actually attend day schools. But talk to me about day schools, and also talk for a minute, Scott, about the extent to which they should or should not be funded by the Jewish community, given the fact that day schools represent such a small piece of Jewish youth education in America.
Well, that's a big question, and I'm a strong proponent of day schools. I mean, I'm a very strong proponent of day schools. I think that we ought to, as a community, aspire to having a much larger proportion of our children educated in day schools. We need to make day schools, and this is a very large aspiration, we need to make day schools a responsibility not just of the parents who are sending their kids to school, but of the entire community. Because really our entire future, it revolves around having educated Jews lead our next generation. And the problem is that we have made day school tuition a form of birth control. I have to tell you, when I did the book tour, I had more than a few people come up to me afterward, having read the chapter where I used that term. And they said, you know, I only had 2 children, I really wanted to have 3. I only had, in some cases, 1 child because we wanted to make sure we could give that child a day school experience and send that child to camp. And I've seen people almost in tears over that decision, so it's no joke.
I want to make sure people understand. There are families that decided not to have an additional child, whether it's a second child or a third child, because they wanted to put their children through a day school education. But they knew what the financial burden would be. They didn't think they could really afford it. And so they chose not to have another child.
Absolutely. And I met folks who sent their kids to Hebrew schools but really wanted to send their children to day schools. It's a huge problem. I mean, I can't overstate the size of the problem, and I do believe that day schools need to model better having a more equitable participation of each family in paying the tuition bill. But I don't think it's enough to just rely on the parents.
This should be a communal responsibility.
It should be a communal responsibility. It's not. And I think a number of communities around the country, New Jersey, other places, are forming community-wide endowments. That's crucial. I think we need much more of them. But it's not going to be, there's no one easy solution to day school financing. It's such a huge number. The day school enterprise, and I do know some of these numbers from having been on the chair of the Fund for Jewish Education. The GDP of the New York area day school system is about $1.5 billion. That's a huge number. By the way, that dwarfs the UJ annual campaign, which is, let's say, $140 million. So even if we took every last dollar, even if UJ took every last dollar and applied it to day schools, it wouldn't actually meaningfully move the needle on the affordability issue. And of course, UJ has to support a variety of critical infrastructure needs here and in Israel and abroad for rescue and resettlement. So it's unrealistic. But even if we were to do that, it still wouldn't move the needle. So the day school financial crisis is huge. It's growing. And I fully expect, unfortunately, and it really pains me to say this, but I think nationally we could see 10% of our day schools close over the next couple of years. Some of them are really operating hand to mouth. So I wish I had better news for you on that score.
But you would encourage, to the extent to which it is possible, communities to support their day school, irrespective of, beyond just parents who have children there.
And to do it across denominations, so that every child has some subvention that's provided to them across the community. There are communities that do this very effectively, most notably Montreal. About every child has about a $2,500 subvention from the community. So it is effective, and in communities where there are greater subventions, where there are greater subsidies of children, there's no doubt they have greater day school attendance.
You're also convinced that day school education is an enormous help in creating a sense of Jewish identity among young people.
Yes. I think the more day school, the better. The more years, the better. But I do have to say that there's a substantial drop-off of day school attendance from 8th grade into high school.
That's correct.
Actually, one could argue that if you only had 4 years of money to spend on day school, spend it in high school, because identity formation of not just Jews, but of just about everybody, takes place very heavily in the teen years.
Absolutely right.
And I think we've underemphasized that as a community. By the way, also, if a child is very serious about learning Jewish studies, about Judaica, they can make up a large part of the gap, having had a strong Hebrew school experience and entering a day school experience as a freshman in high school. A lot of that can be made up. And some schools across the country, some high schools,
how interesting,
are actually pretty good at doing that.
Okay. You know, in some way, ironically, it's too bad that the bar mitzvah age is 13. And historically, there are reasons for that. And at one point, becoming a 13-year-old was vastly different than becoming a 13-year-old today.
Right.
So that at one point, the joke, today I am a man, when I became 13, it had more truth to it. No 13-year-old is a man in our culture now. It's too bad that somehow bar mitzvah does not occur somewhere around the graduation of high school.
Right.
And that brings me to ask you to comment on a very interesting plank where you're suggesting that the bar mitzvah experience of the 13-year-old be reaffirmed every 18 years. Right. First of all, how did that come to you? And what can you tell me about how that has been in any way implemented?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because first of all, you're right about the bat mitzvah age. When bar mitzvah started in, let's say, the 16th century, the average lifespan was 31 to 35. So you were really into your life by 13. And it really isn't realistic to look at a 13-year-old and say, okay, you're about to learn a trade and go off to work. You've had your Jewish education.
Silly.
It's not the way it works anymore.
It's silly.
So I had been thinking about this for a long time, because it didn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And what occurred to me one day, it was during a Passover, it was during Pesach, is that what we really need to do is to continue that bar bat mitzvah experience, that heavy year of preparation, of thinking, of really trying to come to grips with what Jewish identity means at that time of my life or one's life, and try to do it at various life cycle points. So I wrote about it in the book. Every 18 years, at 13, after 13, at 31, which, by the way, as you know from the book, a lot of men and Jewish men and women still aren't married at 31.
That's correct.
So people are thinking about what to do with the rest of their lives. At 49, it's sort of the traditional midlife crisis. Rather than buy a red sports car, consider bar bat mitzvah, consider chai mitzvah, renewal. And then at 67, these days 67-year-olds are healthy. Please
Absolutely,
God will be healthy.
of course.
It's called the third age. And and are looking where to rededicate the rest of their life. So an experience, again, at 18 years can be very useful, and then 80 plus, which has always been a time. So what happened is I wrote this, and I wrote this book actually, and it was published. It was printed just about at my 49th birthday. So this was to a certain degree, my bar mitzvah project, my chai mitzvah project for renewal. But what surprised me is after the book was published, probably of all of the responses that I received on emails and the like, I think the most response I got from rabbis, from educators is, hey, this is a good idea. We want to do this in our synagogue. Can you send us a curriculum? Can you, and honestly, I hadn't written a curriculum, but can you help us implement this? And I tried here and there to do that. And a few people sent me letters saying they had actually created their own chai mitzvah experience, their own renewal experience. I have to admit, I was sort of thinking about all this and not really doing it in a systemic way. And I met at a Jewish Funders Network conference in Atlanta a few years ago, a woman by the name of Audrey Lichter, who also very active in the Jewish community in Hartford and elsewhere. And she said to me the key thing, which is this has to be done on a community basis. So in Hartford, chai mitzvah has now started on a community basis. There are 19 synagogues in Hartford ranging from Reform to Conservative, Reconstructionist, Modern Orthodox, Young Israel, the whole panoply, Chabad, all 19 synagogues signed up because it made sense to everybody. This isn't a denominational thing. You can do your own chai mitzvah, you can do your own bar bat mitzvah renewal your own way. And it's now being done in cohorts, with those cohorts.
That's wonderful.
And it's being actively embraced as a community.
I love it. I love it.
So I think that's the way this is going to work. And next year, please God, we're going to bring it to Manhattan, and hopefully in future years bring it to other communities. And we now do have a shrink-wrap curriculum, by the way. We do have ways for synagogues to provide a curriculum, and it's now a year of learning. It's an act of chesed, and each group creates its own act of chesed. For some, it's working with a food pantry or a kosher food kitchen. For others, it's about raising money. For others, it's about an inwardly looking way of raising the kedusha, or the level of chesed and giving within their own synagogue. And for others, they've picked one-off projects by themselves. So it's the learning, the chesed project, a ritual, a communal ritual renewal, because there's something that bar bat mitzvah is not just about the person, it's also about the community.
Absolutely right.
And so part of chai mitzvah, part of this renewal, is having a communal ritual ceremony that says, you know what, I have reaffirmed as a Jew. This is important to me.
Scott, it's brilliant. I'll tell you another reason why I love it. Part of the problem with education post-bar mitzvah is it's not enough goal-oriented. People learn best when they're working towards a goal. It's why when you take a child and give them to a piano teacher, every time you turn around there's another recital. The recital is a way to motivate and to give a goal to that student. I don't care what level, they're going to play the piano, and then there's going to be a goal. You're going to get up, and the parents will be in the room, and it's called a recital. Part of the problem of post-bar mitzvah education is there's no payoff.
Right.
And you talked about that instinctively in our first half hour together, that basically there's got to be in some way an end, a goal. So what you've done is you've again given the student of a different age and a different intellectual and a different emotional presence a goal-oriented activity, so that whether it's learning or whether it's chesed or whatever the actual ceremony is, you're preparing for a moment when your family can be with you in a communal synagogue setting and say to you, isn't that wonderful? And you know it is as exciting for the congregation that watches it as it is for the people who are participating.
That's the.
So I love it. I love it.
Thank you.
I love it. Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple others here.
Sure.
You have here Israel trips for all American Jews.
Right.
It is shocking, by the way, the percentage of Jews in America who have never been to Israel. But when I read this, the first thing I'm thinking of is Birthright Israel, and you've been involved with Birthright Israel formally. But I want you to speak about why you believe the trip to Israel is so important, both for young people and, really, you say, for all American Jews.
Well, there's something magical about a trip to Israel.
Magical.
Absolutely magical. And it shows through on the statistics, by the way. Someone who's had a trip to Israel as a teen, and I think those are powerful trips as a teen, is much more likely to think being Jewish is important, marry, consider Israel an important part of their identity. And I think we need to start getting kids to Israel from 16 on.
I agree 100%.
So I'm a member of the steering committee, and I have to tell you, if I could almost cry to tell you that because of the financial world we live in, from having sent about 44,000 young adults to Israel 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago, we're now down to about 26,000.
Scott, there's a horrendous financial crisis in Birthright Israel.
It's not that there's a crisis within Birthright Israel in this sense. Birthright Israel can only spend the money it has. So it takes in what it has, doesn't live on any surplus. There's no hidden vat of money. But it can only spend what it gets from the philanthropists who donate, the government of Israel, and the federations across the country. So as those numbers have not grown, and particularly there was a major funding by one philanthropist, that's caused tremendous declines in the number of children and the number of young adults that can be sent. There's nothing more cost effective, and I think in terms of return on investment, it's really hard to think of a more cost effective return both to the American Jewish community and to Israel. And from my perspective, what I've tried to argue is that for Israel, who's a partner in this, that it's no longer just a nice thing to do for the diaspora. It's an important national security issue for Israel to make sure that diaspora Jews are connected to Israel. And if you look at the numbers in the book, and I show this in terms of the numbers spent in Israel, I think this is a fantastic investment for Israel that they could justify, period, even if there was nothing else going on. But for the American Jewish community, it's also critical. What I'd love to see, and my aspiration, is to have the Birthright Israel gift actually expanded and start in applying. It costs basically $2,800 or so to send a young adult to Israel. Let's call it $3,000 for round figures. I would love to see the community as a whole and the government of Israel as a whole provide a subsidy that every Jewish child at the age of 16 gets as their Sweet 16 gift, if you will, a voucher that says this is good for $2,000 subsidy on a trip from your 16th birthday on, or a free Birthright Israel trip. It expires on your 25th birthday. I think that has the power to actually reverse the current situation where we're marketing trips to young Jews and actually give the Jewish 16-year-old or young teenager and young adult the voucher, and puts them in the place of having the demand, so that they should take this voucher and people will look at it and say, this is expiring. This is $2,000 or a free trip free birthright trip. If I don't use it, it evaporates.
What a waste it would have been.
What a waste it would have been. And I think we'll encourage more young adults to go to Israel. But I think getting kids in that early trip, in that 16-year-old, in a high school experience or a trip between summers in high school, is critical. But if I had to spend money on one thing, it would probably be Birthright Israel.
I agree 100%.
As a return on investment.
I agree with you. Are you saying, is the state of Israel continuing to put in the same amount of money?
Actually, they are.
And what about the federations?
The federations are putting in broadly the same amount. It's down perhaps a tad. But the issue is there hasn't been the growth. And there was tremendous growth on the philanthropist side, and particularly on the place of one philanthropist that is not funding in the future. And so the numbers have shrunk very dramatically.
Okay, but we've talked here before that Michael Steinhardt and Charles Bronfman were two of the individuals, not the only ones,
right,
but two of the principal individuals who put up the money for Birthright
right.
Israel in the beginning. As far as you know, are the two of them still committed?
Yes.
It's not.
It's
so
not them.
I want to make sure people understand.
Oh, yeah.
It's not Steinhardt.
No.
It's not Bronfman.
As far as I'm concerned, there's a special place in Olam Haba for them.
Absolutely right.
It's not them. I mean, it's public information.
Right.
So it's the Adelson
Exactly
family.
right.
So they had provided a very large gift and, frankly, invested $100 million over the last few years. So
Do you have any idea why they've changed?
That's not for me.
Okay, fine. Okay. But we agree that it is probably the single most effective way at the moment of taking American Jewish youth and giving them some magic. You know, as people say, something happens, and it sounds trite, but it just happens to young person after young person after young person, and the results seem to be very positive in terms of what happens afterward. There has been criticism that not enough follow-up is done with the Birthright kids who come back to the United States, and now there's an attempt to do Birthright next. Right. But my own feeling is all we're doing is making something that's good even better. And that I agree, if somebody once said to me, if you had $50 million, what would you do? I would give it at the moment to Birthright so that more and more kids could go. But I agree with you 100%. Okay, so that's why you put one of the planks is that Israel trips for American Jews. Okay, I want to ask you about another plank. You entitled it Social Action, Ethical Behavior, Tzedakah. Explain why that's a plank. And what do you mean by touching on those values in the Jewish tradition as a plank for going forward in energizing American Jewry?
Well, I think if we don't work on those values, then all the other 9 planks we shouldn't bother with in the end.
They're the core, aren't they?
They're the core. They're the reason we're put on this planet. They're the reason why Abraham was chosen. They're the reason why we're here today. And I think those values give the deepest meaning to us. And as you know, I don't need to tell you, tzedakah doesn't just mean charity. It means actually righteousness.
That's
it means
correct.
Acting in an appropriate manner.
Yes, I'll use a phrase you well know, gmilut chasadim. The Jew is involved in acts of kindness and loving kindness wherever and whenever possible. And you want that to be a central theme in the American Jewish community. Why isn't it already?
It should be, and I would tell you 2 things. One, I think as we've been facing our own myriad crises, there's a real impulse to just focus inward. And to some degree we need to focus inward. I don't disagree with that. But when you're up to your when you're up to your neck in alligators, you've always got to remember that the real reason you got there was because you went to drain the swamp, and that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be in the business of draining the swamp. So we've always got to keep that in mind. Our idea isn't, my personal view isn't we need to stay Jews so that we can be Jews and there can be more Jews. No. The reason we're Jews is because we have to do our little bit to make this world a little better place. And we have to do that by being an example for other communities, even when that's difficult, and even when we can't affect change that's going to be transformative. I think clearly I think we all shep nachat. We all are proud of the fact that the Israeli government has sent a unit to Haiti right now.
A medical unit.
A medical unit that's having tremendous impact and really acting, if you will, as an Or LaGoyim. Here's a little country that sent 20 doctors in one particular unit.
Established a hospital before anybody else did.
And is getting tremendous praise from the local Haitians. Now, that's not enough. Again, we aren't changing the world. There's so much to do there. But I think that's what we aspire to do. That's what we need to aspire. We were part of, the Jewish community was a critical part of the civil rights movement in the United States. It pains me that we no longer have that sort of unified vision. And that support for the civil rights movement spanned Jews of all different movements, kippot, no kippot, whatever it was.
You're absolutely right.
That's what we ought to be doing. And I think I bring some examples where we have the ability, and we also have to watch out for this, because we have the ability to have a negative impact as well. And I think it goes without saying the Madoff experience. I raised a couple of other negative implications where Jews were known for doing things that they shouldn't have done in a public financial way. And then it's the exact opposite impact. That's an enabling impact. So we have, I think, tremendous potential. The question is what we do with that potential, but we always have to keep one eye on that, because if we're not doing that, then we should give up the other Jewish stuff. We should close up shop.
I love the way you say it. We're running out of time, so I'm going to ask you just brief comments, okay?
Okay.
You have a section on intermarriage, and lo and behold, unless I've read you wrong, what you're suggesting as a strategy is that we should encourage more conversion of the non-Jewish spouse. Did I read you correctly?
Well, I say two things. I say yes. I think we need to be open about encouraging conversion of the non-Jewish spouse. I also think we need to be open about children of intermarriage, getting the parents involved, getting the Jewish parent particularly involved in the Jewish upbringing of the child. This is particularly, by the way, an issue where men intermarry, where Jewish men intermarry, because even the statistics, and I give them in the book, even where Jewish men intend to raise their children as Jewish, clearly they do it far less than Jewish women who intermarry and intend to raise their children as Jewish. So what I suggest is that and I suggest a number of ways, that we get Jewish men much more involved with that. I do think there's a value to having a common definition of Jews, and this is a very complicated subject for a brief comment.
Right, it's not
but
fair.
I do think that there are ways that we can at least get a little closer together. We're not going to resolve it in a way that's going to make everybody happy, and I think we're just going to have to say, hey, we're Jews. We're not going to make all Jews happy.
You would say, however, that intermarriage is one of the most serious problems confronting American Jewish life.
I think it's a symptom. I think it's not the core. It's having, there can't even be intermarriage as a positive. When there's a conversion, when the non-Jewish spouse takes Judaism seriously and makes a real conversion. I met, one of the things I loved in the course of the book tour is I met a whole bunch of people who, they married, converted, divorced, and the non-Jewish spouses, the currently Jewish, the converted spouses, they're saying, hey, I'm still Jewish. I'm like, and they're attending book tours and saying, and into these issues in a tremendous way. So I think It's a complicated issue. It's clearly even more complicated in the whole half hour. But I think we need to be upfront, and I really think this is important to say, we want you to be part of the Jewish family.
Very good. Very, very good. I want to ask you what I think is the most difficult question of all now as we near the end. There's a paradox I find in your book, Getting Our Groove Back.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the paradox. I want to see how you would deal with it. The suggestions you make, all of which are positive, and any individual can gravitate to one more than the other, or ones more than the others, but they're all brilliant, and they all, if they were all adopted, one could only see American life being more energized.
Halavai.
But they presuppose, in my mind, an American Jewish laity, especially adults and parents, who get it, who would be open to the things you're describing. You and I spoke earlier about the importance of Friday night in the home. There may be nothing more important that a Jewish parents can do for their children Jewishly is than have Friday night Shabbat of any kind they want, but it's Shabbat every Friday night, and their children know that it is part of their lives. So that Thursday is the day before Shabbat.
Right.
Okay. But that presumes that there are Jewish adults who get it, and who can be drawn to it, and who want it. And so the paradox for me is that this works, your things work, to the extent to which there is already a core, enough of a core Jewish community that would embrace what you're saying, and in part, they're the ones who don't need it.
Right.
The paradox is, you need to move the Jew who isn't there to want the things that you're suggesting. And so I'm saying to you, Scott Shay, that's the most difficult aspect, it seems to me, in what you're trying to achieve by offering us these 10 planks. I want your response.
That's an excellent question. It's really an excellent question, and it's one I'm glad you asked, because it bothered me for a long time too. Is how do you go from here to all the way over there? And what I really believe is that the glue that in a way holds this all together is Chai Mitzvah. It's Bar and Bat Mitzvah Renewal. Because we need to re-engage with folks who had a lousy Hebrew school experience, who maybe didn't go to Israel. And we have to, I think if we can create a communal norm where, yes, every 18 years, I'm going to give my Judaism a serious rethink. No, I met one guy, he told me that he graduated Hebrew school, and he said his conception of God was Captain Kirk on the Enterprise starship, giving out commands. Well, I hope by the time he's 31, he'll have a different conception of what a God that's meaningful to him means. And I think at every age we do. So if we can reconnect as a Jewish community, and not every day, every year, but if we take any time from being specific times and get that reconnection, particularly at 31, 49, 67, all the ages, we'll have a chance to re-enter and to have people at least grapple and decide if their Judaism is important. Hopefully they will make the decision from our Jewish educators and other professionals and other teachers. They'll make the decision for themselves. Yes, this is so important. I need to pass this on to my kids. I need to do Friday night dinner. I need to do the things that are important. And so I really hope and pray that the glue that holds this all together is that Chai Mitzvah, is that Bar Bat Mitzvah Renewal. So if we get that and we do it as communities, I think the rest of the planks are achievable. I'm an optimist.
Good for you. Scott Shay's book is Getting Our Groove Back. By the way, you can get it on Amazon anytime you want. It is a wonderful read, and it's also an interest. There are interesting ideas being raised for what programmatically should be done in the Jewish community. You heard Scott, who is very excited about the high renewal of Bar Mitzvah every 18 years. It's just one of the wonderful ideas that are in this book. I've wanted to meet you for so long. You are a very special human being.
Thank you so much.
And I have loved meeting you. I hope this is the first of many times we're together. If there's any way I can ever help you, I want to, and I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha in everything you do, whether it's in your professional life or serving the Jewish community and with your family and with Susan. And I wish you only the best. You're a very, very special man.
Thank you very much, Mark. It has been such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And that was our meeting with Scott Shay. Again, I invite you, if you want to be in touch with Scott, you can do so through me. Simply email me or write me. I will forward your comments, your questions on to Scott. Of course, as always, it's a pleasure to be with you. If you have any thoughts or comments of your own that you'd like to share about the ideas Scott and I expressed, please email me or write me this week. I look forward to hearing from all of you. And so until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.